We've all been sold a massive, furry lie about man's best friend. You think your dog is loyal? Of course it is. But there is a creature out there whose loyalty doesn't come from submission, belly rubs, or a lack of survival skills. It comes from a terrifyingly advanced psychological ledger. There is an animal in your neighborhood right now that will stalk you, bring you stolen jewelry, and literally dive-bomb your worst enemies. And the most bizarre part? If you cross them, they won't just hate you, they will memeize your facial features and pass your face down to their unborn children as a permanent, multi-generational target. But before we look at this flying mafia, we need to talk about the dog myth. For over 30,000 years, humanity has been taking fearsome, apex predator wolves and genetically molding them into heavily breathing pugs and anxious chihuahuas. We literally force dogs to love us through generations of selective breeding. It is essentially an ancient, evolutionary case of Stockholm Syndrome paved with kibble and squeaky toys. When a dog looks at you, its brain releases a massive spike of oxytocin, the exact same chemical human brains release when we look at our own babies. It's a literal chemical dependency. The dog doesn't have a choice in the matter, its biology dictates that it must love you to survive. But true, calculating, undeniable loyalty? That requires a choice. It requires an animal to look at you, assess your value as a partner, and make a conscious decision to ally with you. Throughout history, humanity has tried to buy the loyalty of just about everything with a pulse. Ancient Egyptian pharaohs tried to tame cheetahs to use them for royal hunting expeditions. The Polish army famously enlisted a Syrian brown bear named Wojciech during World War II, who famously drank beer, wrestled with soldiers, and actually carried heavy artillery shells to the front lines. The US Navy has spent millions of dollars training bottlenose dolphins to detect underwater mines. But all of these historical anomalies usually boil down to one core thing: a food transaction. The animal complies because the animal gets fed. To find an animal more loyal than a dog, we have to look for a creature that possesses something evolutionary biologists call reciprocal altruism, combined with episodic memory. Most animals live entirely in the present moment. They react to their environment. They get hungry, they hunt. They get scared, they run. They don't plot. They don't hold grudges, and they certainly don't pay debts. But the creature we're talking about today actively remembers the past, anticipates the future, and holds complex psychological debts. This animal possesses a brain structure that is incredibly dense with neurons, giving it an encephalization quotient, which is a fancy way of saying brain-to-body mass ratio that rivals chimpanzees and even early human ancestors. Speaking of loyalty, if you want to be loyal to this almost dead channel, hit the subscribe button right now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you. Now, back to the bizarre science of biological loyalty. You see, true loyalty requires an animal to recognize you not as a generic food dispenser, but as a highly specific, individual entity in a complex social hierarchy. Before I reveal what this creature is, you need to understand the sheer, terrifying scope of its intelligence. This is an animal that understands physics. In urban environments, they have been observed gathering hard-shelled nuts that they cannot break open with their own strength. So, they fly to busy intersections, wait for the pedestrian crossing light to turn red, drop the nuts on the asphalt, and fly away. They let thousands of pounds of human-driven metal roll over the nuts to crack them. But they don't swoop down immediately. They wait for the pedestrian light to turn green, knowing that the cars will stop, and then they safely casually walk out into the crosswalk to collect their meal. They understand the patterns of human traffic laws better than half the people driving the cars. They also understand water displacement. If a treat is floating in a tube of water just out of reach, they will drop stones into the tube to raise the water level until they can grab the food. They fashion tools out of twigs to hook grubs out of tree bark. And yet, this isn't an animal we ever domesticated. They chose to live alongside us. The undisputed kings of this terrifying, calculated loyalty belong to the corvid family. I'm talking about crows and ravens. The sheer depth of a crow's loyalty and hatred is the stuff of scientific legend. In an incredibly famous and slightly unhinged study at the University of Washington, researchers decided to test the facial recognition capabilities of local crows. The scientists wore a specific, incredibly creepy caveman mask while trapping, banding, and slightly stressing out the birds before releasing them unharmed. They just wanted to see if the birds would remember the face of their captor. The results were terrifying. Not only did the trapped birds remember the caveman mask, but years later, anyone walking onto that campus wearing that specific mask would be mercilessly scolded, swooped, and dive-bombed by massive flocks of crows. The birds hadn't just remembered the face, they had communicated the exact features of that face to their flock, and taught their children and their neighbors to hate that specific face, long after the original birds were dead. They created a localized, generational trauma centered entirely around one human face. But this bizarre biological quirk works both ways, and this is where the extreme loyalty comes in. When you feed a crow, you aren't just tossing bread to a pigeon. You are entering into a highly complex, psychological gift economy. Crows have been repeatedly documented forming literal mafia-like protection rackets around the homes of humans who show them consistent kindness. Because they have perfect facial recognition, they will recognize you among a sea of thousands of other humans. They will follow you to the grocery store, perching on streetlights to keep an eye on you. If a stray dog, a hawk, or even a threatening person approaches their chosen human, the flock will descend, harassing the threat until it leaves you alone. You effectively gain an aerial security detail. And then, there are the payments. Crows do not like to be in debt. If you provide them with high-value food, like unsalted peanuts in the shell or hard-boiled eggs, they will regularly leave shiny objects on your doorstep, your windowsill, or even directly on your car hood. There are thousands of documented cases of humans receiving gifts from crows. They bring bottle caps, smooth pieces of sea glass, Lego bricks, lost keys, and sometimes even incredibly expensive dropped jewelry like gold rings and earrings. They observe what humans value, shiny things, and they scavenge those exact items to pay you for your friendship. They are literally putting a physical down payment on your continued alliance. It gets even weirder when you realize the sheer scale of their social intelligence. Corvids have distinct regional dialects, meaning crows in New York sound completely different from crows in Tokyo. If a crow from London flies to Paris, it literally will not speak the local language. Furthermore, when one of their own dies, they don't just ignore the body and move on. They hold what scientists can only describe as funerals. When a crow finds a dead comrade, it calls out to the neighborhood. Dozens of crows will gather in the trees and on the power lines in total silence. They aren't just mourning, they are conducting a forensic investigation. They are looking at the body, assessing the area, and figuring out what killed their friend so they can avoid that fate in the future. They possess a level of social intelligence, communication, and memory that rivals higher primates. They practice metacognition, which means they actually know what they know, and they understand what other creatures don't know. So, the next time you see a golden retriever fetch a tennis ball for the 1000th time, go ahead and give it a pat. It loves you, even if its DNA leaves it no other choice. But if you want a bodyguard that actively chooses you, remembers your enemies, protects your house from above, and pays you in stolen jewelry, you might want to skip the pet store and just start carrying a bag of unsalted peanuts.